An empire vanished, but its secrets still flow underground. The real story of the mighty Khwarazmian Empire was not written on parchment, but carved into the earth through a network of subterranean water channels called Qanat. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these silent tunnels reveal the entire life cycle of a forgotten civilization. We will uncover how a society mastered the desert only to collapse, and why their fate hinges on a single critical resource. What does it take for an entire civilization to simply disappear from history? This was a land defined by its thirst. Between two great rivers lay a sprawling basin where the sun ruled supreme, turning any exposed surface water into vapor under its relentless gaze. Shifting sands constantly threatened to reclaim the land, making life on the surface a precarious struggle. Yet it was here, in this arid crucible known as Khwarazm, that the Khwarazmian Empire took root. This region, which now spans parts of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, presented a stark choice to its inhabitants. They could either submit to the desert or find a way to master it. Their survival depended entirely on one thing: controlling water. They learned to coax moisture from the earth itself, transforming patches of desert into lush, green oases that could support not just farms, but entire cities. This was not a matter of convenience, it was the very foundation of their civilization. Every meal, every trade route, every brick in their walls relied on a constant, managed flow of water. This absolute geographic imperative forced them to become masters of hydraulic engineering, pushing human ingenuity to its limits in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. Their entire story begins with this simple, brutal fact and the brilliant solution they engineered deep beneath the sand. Their solution was a masterpiece of subterranean architecture, the Qanat. Deep beneath the sun-baked earth, teams of specialized workers known as muqanis performed what seemed like magic. They began by finding a life-giving aquifer, often nestled at the base of distant mountains, using nothing but generations of observation and simple tools. They did not just dig a well, they engineered an entire hidden river. The system started with a mother well plunged deep into the water table. From this source, they carved a gently sloping underground channel, a tunnel that could stretch for miles. Gravity did all the work, coaxing the water along this secret path. At regular intervals, the muqanis dug vertical shafts down to the main tunnel. These were not for drawing water, but for the monumental tasks of construction, cleaning, and letting air circulate for the workers below. This entire design had one brilliant advantage. By moving water underground, the Qanat protected it from the relentless desert sun, preventing precious liquid from vanishing into the air. Building a single Qanat was a project that could span a human lifetime, or even pass from a father to his son. It represented an incredible investment of labor and faith from the entire community. The slope of the tunnel had to be perfect, a gradient so slight it might drop only a single meter over a kilometer of distance. This gentle fall provided a steady, reliable flow, fast enough to move water but slow enough to prevent the tunnel walls from crumbling. This was engineering with a precision that still commands respect today. These were not just tunnels, they were the silent, flowing arteries of the empire, and their steady pulse would dictate where people could live, farm, and build their cities. If you could see this empire from beneath the sand, its true shape would emerge. The sprawling network of Qanats forms a kind of subterranean blueprint, a ghost map of Khwarazmian civilization that is far more honest than any parchment drawn by a royal cartographer. Where these tunnels cluster together, you find the heartbeat of the empire. The capital city of Gurganj, for instance, was not a random dot on a trade route. It was a deliberate creation made possible by a dense, radiating web of Qanats converging from multiple directions. Each channel fed its districts, its baths, and its vast irrigated fields, supporting a population that could never have survived on surface water alone. The very location of every major city was dictated by where these engineering marvels could bring liquid life, but the story gets even more detailed when you look at the length of the tunnels. A short Qanat means the water source was close, a fortunate and easy gain. A Qanat stretching for dozens of miles, however, speaks of ambition and perhaps desperation. It tells us that the city had grown so large that its local water table was depleted, or that the climate had shifted, forcing engineers to reach further and further into the foothills to find new aquifers. This was a massive investment of labor and resources, a clear signal of a centralized state with the power to coordinate such monumental projects. By simply mapping the spread and density of these systems, archaeologists can trace the empire's frontiers with stunning accuracy. They can see the pulse of expansion as new Qanats are dug into virgin territory, and the slow, grim contraction as tunnels in the outer regions are abandoned and filled with silent sand. This underground network was the empire's true census, its economic ledger, and its lasting signature, written not in ink but in water and stone. Yet this underground network was about more than just survival. It was the engine that powered an economic miracle in the heart of the desert. Picture the bustling Silk Road caravanserais of Khwarazm, where the air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and the sounds of merchants haggling over silks and gems. This vibrant commerce was not fueled by gold alone, but by water. The reliable flow from the Qanats transformed the arid landscape into a breadbasket, producing immense surpluses of wheat and barley. It also allowed for the cultivation of water-intensive crops like cotton and lush orchards of melons, peaches, and pomegranates. These were not just food for the local population. They became highly valuable commodities traded along those same desert routes. The wealth generated from this green bounty paid for everything. It financed the empire's powerful military, built its stunning mosques and libraries, and supported a golden age of art, mathematics, and astronomy. This agricultural surplus positioned Khwarazm as a major cultural and economic crossroads, a beacon of civilization that attracted scholars and merchants from across the known world. But this system required more than just engineers. It created an entire economy around water itself. The constant need for maintenance and repair gave rise to specialized, respected professions. The Muqanis were not just laborers, they were highly skilled experts who passed their knowledge from one generation to the next, knowing that a single mistake could collapse a tunnel and doom a community. The distribution of water was governed by a complex and meticulously fair legal code. Watermasters used carefully calibrated sluice gates and water clocks to allocate precise shares to different farms and neighborhoods, often based on the amount of labor a family had invested in the Qanat's construction. This was not just a technical process, it was a deeply social one. The flow of water literally dictated the flow of capital and goods, making the hydraulic infrastructure the true economic backbone of the empire, far more vital than any single trade route. The management of this precious resource inevitably shaped the entire social and political fabric of the society, creating a civilization built on a foundation of shared responsibility and precise, life-giving order. The water that flowed so freely from the Qanats was not distributed with an even hand. This life-giving resource became a perfect mirror of the empire's rigid social order. At the very top of this hierarchy stood the ruling elite and the major landowners. They did not merely own the land, they owned the very rights to the water itself. This control over the primary resource for survival granted them a form of power that was absolute. A farmer's entire livelihood, the fate of his family and his crops, could be decided with the simple adjustment of a sluice gate by a watermaster serving his aristocratic master. Yet, within this stratified system, the Mukhanis occupied a unique and vital position. These master diggers and engineers possessed a body of knowledge so specialized and dangerous to acquire that it commanded deep respect. Their skills were a closely guarded family trade, passed from father to son, forming a kind of guild that held the empire's physical survival in its hands. They were the only ones who could navigate the dark, unstable tunnels, repair collapses, and ensure the water kept flowing. This gave them a measure of social standing, but they were ultimately still laborers in the service of the elite, subject to their demands and timelines. Disputes over water were inevitable, and they revealed the intense social friction just beneath the surface of this ordered society. Arguments over stolen irrigation time, damaged channels, or unequal distribution were so common that special water courts were established to adjudicate them. One can only imagine the detailed social history that would be contained in their lost records, a chronicle of everyday conflict and compromise. The system itself was designed to enforce this control. The central distribution points, the master sluices, were physical structures where the power of the state was made manifest. The authority of the Shah did not just reside in a distant palace, it was embedded in the landscape, flowing as surely as the water through the canals. This centralized control was the empire's great strength, creating order from chaos, but it also planted the seeds of a profound vulnerability, a single point of failure for the entire civilization. This rigid social structure, built entirely around the control of water, has left behind a timeline far more durable than any royal chronicle. The Qanats themselves are history books carved in stone, their layers telling a story of boom and bust that written records often miss. While parchments can be lost to fire or decay, these subterranean passages preserve a robust chronological record. Archaeologists use techniques like stratigraphy, reading the sequence of construction layers just like the pages of a book, and radiocarbon dating on organic materials like wooden support beams or even ancient seeds trapped in the mortar. Every aspect of the tunnel contributes to the narrative. The distinct marks left by different digging tools, the composition of the plaster holding the walls together, and the patterns of sediment deposited by the flowing water all offer clues. By piecing this evidence together, researchers can establish a precise timeline of when a Qanat was first dug, when it was expanded or repaired, and finally, when it was abandoned to the silent encroachment of sand. This physical record reveals the empire's pulse with startling clarity. Periods of intensive Qanat construction align perfectly with known eras of imperial expansion and prosperity under powerful shahs. It is during these golden ages that we see new tunnels branching out into previously uninhabited desert, a clear sign of a confident, centralized state investing its wealth and labor into growth. Conversely, the layers of silt and collapse tell a darker story. A sudden, thick layer of sediment washed into a tunnel might indicate a catastrophic flood upstream, a natural disaster that overwhelmed the maintenance crews. More telling are the gradual accumulations of debris, the slow crumble of unmaintained walls. These mark long periods of neglect, suggesting social upheaval, a loss of centralized authority, or an economic decline so severe that the community could no longer support the Mukhanis. The very materials used in construction chart technological progress. The early tunnels, lined with rough stone, give way in later periods to channels meticulously sealed with baked brick, a technique that likely spread along the Silk Road from other advanced cultures. This shift is not just about better engineering. It is a tangible sign of the empire's connections and its adoption of new ideas. Perhaps the most profound revelation lies not in the stonework, but in the dirt that filled these channels. The sediments within these tunnels hold a deeper climatic story, one that would ultimately seal the empire's fate. The dirt that sealed these tunnels holds the empire's final secrets. Within the silent, stagnant sections of the Qanats, where water once flowed, centuries of accumulated silt, pollen, and microscopic life created a perfect environmental time capsule. Scientists can now extract core samples from these layers, reading them like the rings of a tree to reconstruct the regional climate with astonishing precision. Each band of sediment tells a distinct story. A layer composed of extremely fine, powdery dust points to a period of prolonged and punishing drought, when winds stripped the barren soil and carried it into the open maintenance shafts. In stark contrast, a stratum of coarser sand and gravel indicates an era of sudden, heavy rainfall, when violent runoff from the surface was washed down the shafts and into the tunnels. This is not just a record of weather, it is a chronicle of stress. The pollen trapped in this mud is equally revealing. Shifts in the types of plant spores, from water-hungry crops like cotton to more resilient grains like millet, show us how farmers were desperately adapting their practices in the face of a changing climate. They were fighting a losing battle against a drying world. By dating these cores, researchers have identified the ghost of mega-droughts, periods of aridity that lasted for decades. Can you imagine the strain this placed on the entire hydraulic system? As the water table dropped, the mother wells ran dry, and the gentle slopes of the Qanats became useless, delivering only a trickle or nothing at all. The empire's entire existence was a delicate balance between human ingenuity and environmental generosity, and the climate was slowly withdrawing its support. This environmental pressure created a society perpetually on the brink, a civilization whose fragility was written in the very dust that choked its lifeblood. The Mongols understood that true conquest meant more than just defeating an army. It meant breaking the systems that allowed a civilization to exist. When their forces swept into Khwarazm in the early 13th century, they brought a strategy of total war, one that targeted the very resource that had built the empire. Persian chroniclers like Juvayni recorded the grim efficiency with which the invaders located and destroyed the Qanat networks. This was not random vandalism. It was a calculated campaign of hydraulic annihilation. Mongol soldiers would collapse the vertical access shafts, burying the tunnels beneath tons of earth and rock. They would divert rivers to flood and erode the delicate channels, or simply fill them with debris until the underground rivers were silenced forever. The goal was to inflict a wound that would never heal. By destroying the water supply, they transformed the empire's most fertile regions into barren wastelands, ensuring that even if the cities were retaken, they could never be repopulated. The archaeological record bears this out with chilling clarity. Across the heartland of the old empire, core samples from Qanat systems show a single, catastrophic collapse layer, a stratum of destruction that can be dated with precision to the exact years of the Mongol invasion. This layer is not the slow accumulation of neglect. It is a sudden, violent, and simultaneous end. The result was an immediate and devastating famine. Communities that had thrived for centuries were forced to abandon their homes in a mass exodus. Their agricultural surplus vanished, their economic engines shattered. The Mongols did not just conquer the Khwarazmian Empire, they extinguished its means of life, severing the lifelines that had sustained it for generations. This deliberate sabotage was the final, undeniable death blow. but the silent testimony of the tunnels suggests the empire may have already been on its knees, weakened from within, before the first Mongol rider ever appeared on the horizon. The empire's final crisis did not begin with the thunder of hooves. It began in the silence of the tunnels with the slow, steady creep of silt. Long before any foreign army could pose a threat, the Khwarazmian Empire was being choked from within. A Qanat is not a static structure. It is a living system that demands constant, vigilant care. The Mukhanis were its physicians, performing the endless work of clearing sediment from the channels and shoring up walls against collapse. When this maintenance faltered, the entire system began a slow, inexorable decline. A single season of neglect could reduce the water flow to a trickle. A few years could see a tunnel completely blocked, its life-giving function extinguished. Archaeologists find this story written in the dirt. In the final decades before the Mongol invasion, core samples from major Qanats reveal layers of severe, unchecked siltation. This is not the thin dust of a passing drought, but thick, compacted layers of debris that built up over time without any sign of being cleared away. There are no new tool marks on the walls, no fresh plaster repairs, no evidence that the Mukhanis ever returned to restore the flow. This tells a profound and troubling story. It means the organized labor required to sustain the empire's heart was no longer being mobilized. The state's capacity, or its will, to coordinate and fund this essential work was failing. Perhaps tax revenues had dried up, leaving no money to pay the skilled diggers. Maybe social unrest or a fractured leadership made it impossible to organize the crews. The Qanats, in their silent decay, became a perfect barometer of state capacity. Their declining health mirrored a sickness in the political and economic body of the empire itself. This internal decay created a civilization already balanced on a knife's edge. A society struggling to manage its most critical resource is a society stripped of resilience. Its agricultural surplus would have been shrinking, its cities growing tense and hungry, its treasury emptying. When a state can no longer perform its most basic function, ensuring the water flows, it has already lost the mandate of survival. The empire was becoming a hollow shell, its magnificent infrastructure quietly crumbling from within. This gradual, self-inflicted decline set the stage for a catastrophe. It meant that when the external shock finally came, the empire had no reserves, no margin for error. The Mongols did not just defeat a powerful enemy. They toppled a structure whose foundations were already riddled with cracks, a civilization that had already begun to abandon itself. These final layers of sand are the empire's last will and testament. For an archaeologist, the difference between a collapsed tunnel and an abandoned one is unmistakable. A collapse is an event often followed by frantic repair work, marked by fresh tool marks and new bricks. Total infill is an ending. It is the wind-blown sand of the Karakum Desert, patiently and silently filling the vertical shafts until the entire tunnel becomes a solid cast of its former self. This sand did not wash in with a single storm. It accumulated grain by grain over seasons and years, with no one left to clear it away. That is the true signal of the point of no return. It means the institutional memory held by the Mukhanis was lost. The specialized knowledge of how to navigate, repair, and restore these tunnels died with the last generation of diggers who fled or perished. It means the social organization needed to marshal 100 workers for a cleaning project had evaporated. The state, as a functioning entity, was no longer present. This abandonment was a slow, grinding process. The Mongol invasion delivered a horrific, definitive shock, but the subsequent decades saw a death by 1,000 cuts. plague swept through the weakened and displaced populations. The remaining survivors, facing a landscape where the water no longer flowed, made the only rational choice left. They packed what they could carry and migrated, following the retreating promise of water to other oases or river valleys, leaving their homes to the desert. The very sands that once threatened the empire now became its shroud, preserving the Qanats in a state of perfect archaeological sleep for centuries. This final silence tells a nuanced story. It was not merely a foreign army that erased the Khwarazmian Empire. It was the fatal intersection of a brutal external attack and a pre-existing internal fragility. The empire's lifeblood was choked off from the outside, but its internal immune system was already too compromised to fight back. And yet, even as the last tunnel filled with dust, the brilliant idea of the Qanat refused to die. The silence that fell over the Khwarazmian Qanats was not the end of the story. The empire crumbled, but its greatest invention refused to die. The knowledge of the Qanat, born from the desperate ingenuity of desert survival, began an epic journey of its own. It traveled west along the Silk Road, carried not by armies, but by the very people displaced by the empire's fall, the Mukanis, the engineers, the merchants who had seen the system work. This technology found a new home in the arid landscapes of North Africa, where it became known as the Fagara. From there, it crossed the Mediterranean to Spain, where Muslim engineers built intricate networks called Viajes d'Agua to supply cities and farms. The core principle remained unchanged, a testament to its sheer brilliance: tap a distant aquifer and let gravity do the rest, all while protecting the precious water from the evaporating sun. This was not a secret that could be contained by borders or lost with a single defeat. It was an idea whose time had come, a solution so elegant and effective that it became a cornerstone of civilization in dry lands across the planet. The Spanish even carried the concept to the Americas, where traces of its influence can be seen in the water systems of colonial Mexico. The persistence of working Qanats in modern Iran, still bringing water to fields and homes after thousands of years, is a living monument. It honors not a king or a general, but the anonymous Khwarazmian engineer who first devised a way to make the desert bloom. This invites a fascinating comparison. How does this hidden, gentle system measure up against the more famous waterworks of the ancient world? The true genius of the Khwarazmian Qanat is thrown into sharp relief when we place it beside its more famous cousins. Look at the monumental Roman aqueducts, their soaring arches a testament to imperial might, and a very public declaration of control over nature. They were designed to impress, moving vast quantities of water across great distances, but their strength was also their weakness. An exposed stone channel is a perfect target for an invading army or an earthquake, and its water is constantly lost to the open air through evaporation. The Qanat offered a completely different philosophy. It was a hidden, almost secretive system, prioritizing resilience and efficiency over spectacle. Its subterranean path made it nearly invulnerable to attack and all but eliminated water loss, a critical advantage in a land where every drop was a battle won against the sun. This was engineering for survival, not for glory. On the other side of the world, the breathtaking stepwells of India served a different, yet equally vital purpose. These intricate stair-step temples carved into the earth were masterpieces of community architecture. They provided access to a falling water table, yes, but they also functioned as cool, subterranean gathering places for social and religious life. They were reservoirs, not transporters. A stepwell held water where it was found. A Qanat, in contrast, was a moving river, actively delivering life across dozens of miles to create new farmland and sustain distant cities. Each of these systems was a brilliant answer to a local problem. The Romans had abundant stone and labor to conquer geography. The Indians needed to manage a seasonally fluctuating water table in a socially cohesive way. The Khwarazmians, facing an utterly water-starved environment, perfected a system of stealth and sustainability. Their achievement was not in moving the most water, but in losing the least. This ancient focus on efficiency is precisely what draws the attention of modern hydrologists today. In a world increasingly concerned with water scarcity, the Qanat is no longer just a relic. It is a textbook. Scientists and engineers are now studying these millennia-old designs, realizing that the Khwarazmian solution to desert living may hold keys to our own future, offering a blueprint for how to live in harmony with some of the planet's most challenging environments without fighting a losing war against evaporation. The silent, sand-choked arteries of the Khwarazmian Empire are finally beginning to speak again. Their modern rediscovery is a detective story written in dust and data, where archaeologists, geologists, and hydrologists form interdisciplinary teams to listen. They no longer rely on guesswork or chance discoveries. Today, the search begins from the sky. High-resolution satellite imagery scans the desert landscape, searching for the ghostly signature of a vanished civilization. The telltale sign is not a wall or a foundation, but a perfectly straight line of faint depressions marching across the terrain. These are the filled-in vertical shafts of a Qanat, visible only as subtle dips in the earth, a pattern that is unmistakably human-made. To confirm what the satellites see, scientists deploy ground-penetrating radar. This device sends pulses of energy into the ground, painting a picture of subsurface disturbances. It can trace the path of the main tunnel itself, a hollow void or a filled-in channel snaking just beneath the surface, revealing the entire skeleton of the system without ever breaking the soil. In some cases, drones equipped with thermal cameras fly at dawn. As the sun heats the desert surface, the areas above a water-filled or even just a damp tunnel retain coolness differently, showing up as a cool, linear streak on the thermal image. It is a direct glimpse of the ancient water, still flowing after all these centuries. This non-invasive mapping allows researchers to understand the sheer scale of the network, to see the empire's hydraulic blueprint in its entirety before a single shovel ever touches the ground. When the time comes for physical excavation, it is a delicate and dangerous operation. These are not simple holes in the ground. They are unstable, centuries-old structures threatening to collapse at any moment. Modern engineers must first reinforce the vertical shafts with metal braces and scaffolding, mirroring the work of the original Mukanis but with contemporary materials. As researchers descend into the gloom, they are literally walking in the footsteps of those ancient diggers. The air is cool and still, thick with the smell of ancient earth. And then the human connections emerge, a fragment of a pottery oil lamp dropped by a worker and left in the dust, its soot-blackened rim telling of long hours spent in darkness. A rusted iron pick, its handle long since rotted away, lying exactly where it was left. These are not grand treasures, but they are priceless. They are intimate artifacts that transform an abstract engineering marvel into a human story. They connect us directly to the individual who held that tool, who lit that lamp, who spent his life carving this channel through stone and soil. This painstaking work is far more than an academic exercise. It is a recovery mission for lost knowledge. By understanding exactly how the Khwarazmians built and managed their water systems, we are uncovering a library of sustainable practices written in stone and sediment. In a world facing its own water crises, these silent tunnels have urgent lessons to teach us about resilience, efficiency, and living in balance with an arid environment. The past, it turns out, might just hold the key to our future. That ancient blueprint for survival is now speaking directly to our modern world. The Qanat's core principle offers a profound lesson we are only now relearning. It worked in harmony with the aquifer, drawing a sustainable yield through its gentle, gravity-fed flow. This stands in stark contrast to the powerful electric pumps that dominate modern agriculture, which can drain an ancient aquifer in a matter of decades. The Qanat could not over-exploit its source. Its flow was self-regulating, slowing to a trickle if the water table fell, forcing a natural pause and allowing the earth to recharge. It was a system designed for permanence in a way our most advanced technology often is not. But the brilliance was not just in the engineering, it was in the social contract that surrounded it. The Khwarazmians understood that a shared resource demands shared responsibility. Their complex legal frameworks for water distribution, managed by trusted local watermasters, prevented conflict and ensured fairness. This model of collaborative, community-based governance is desperately relevant today in regions where water scarcity fuels political tension and even violence. It proves that the most advanced technology is useless without the social wisdom to manage it for the common good. This ancient wisdom is not just a historical curiosity. Some arid nations, recognizing the vulnerabilities of their own massive dams and energy-intensive pipelines, are now looking backward to move forward. They are clearing and restoring ancient Qanat networks as a resilient, low-energy alternative. These systems are not prone to the political disputes that can shut down a cross-border pipeline, nor do they silt up like a massive reservoir. They represent a decentralized, robust form of water security. The fall of the Khwarazmian Empire serves as a final, sobering warning. It is the ultimate cautionary tale about a civilization that became overdependent on a single, complex system. Their entire world was built on a marvel of hydraulic engineering, but that marvel became a single point of failure. When central authority weakened and maintenance faltered, the entire structure was left critically vulnerable. Does our own modern world, with its interconnected power grids and global supply chains, share that same fragility? Their experience forces us to ask a difficult question about the systems we take for granted today. The true architects of this empire were men who never saw their names carved into stone. They were the Mukanis, the master diggers, whose entire world existed in a cool, dark silence far below the desert floor. Their craft was a form of high-stakes artistry, a secret science passed verbally from one generation to the next. A father would teach his son how to listen to the earth, to identify the subtle shift in soil composition that signaled a stable layer or an impending collapse. They learned to read the geology with their fingertips and to use the stars to chart the precise, unwavering course of a tunnel that might stretch for miles. Their tools were simple, a collection of iron picks, shovels, and baskets, but their knowledge was anything but. They developed ingenious methods to ventilate the deep tunnels, using the vertical shafts themselves to create a natural airflow, or sometimes lighting controlled fires at the base of one shaft to draw fresh air down another. They braced the walls with timber and baked brick, constructing arches deep underground that have held for 1,000 years. Every day they descended was a gamble with death. A sudden cave-in could bury a crew in an instant. They feared pockets of invisible, poisonous gases that could extinguish their oil lamps and then their lives without any warning. They worked in a perpetual, damp chill, their world illuminated only by the flickering light of a small flame, their ears tuned to the ominous creak of the earth settling around them. And yet, for all their indispensable skill, their place in society was a paradox. They held the life of the entire community in their hands, yet they often lived on its fringes. They were respected for their vital expertise, but their work was dirty, dangerous, and confined them to the literal underworld of the empire. We know their story not from grand monuments, but from the intimate artifacts they left behind in the tunnels. A worn wooden handle grooved to fit a specific grip, a leather water skin brittle and dried. These humble objects are the true treasures, connecting us directly to the individuals who sacrificed their safety for the survival of all. These anonymous engineers are the forgotten heroes of history, a reminder that civilization is not built by edicts from a throne, but by the calloused hands of countless laborers whose names are lost to time. The precise division of water was a map of power, etched not on parchment but in the placement of stone and the timing of its flow. At the head of every Qanat system, where the underground channel finally met the open air, stood the master distribution point. This was not a simple opening. It was a complex node of sluice gates and weirs, a physical calculator where the empire's political priorities were translated into liquid shares. The largest gate, built of the most durable stone, always directed the first and most powerful surge of water toward the state-owned farms and the sprawling estates of the high nobility. This was not an accident of geography. It was a deliberate act of hydraulic policy. By securing the food supply and wealth of the ruling class, the system guaranteed the stability of the regime itself. Control over water was, in its most fundamental form, control over people. A significant and uninterrupted portion was then channeled directly to military garrisons and the public baths and reservoirs of key administrative cities. A thirsty soldier cannot patrol, and a parched city cannot govern. This allocation underscored a brutal truth. The empire prioritized its security and its centers of control above all else. Even religious power had its place in this liquid hierarchy. Mosques and madrasas received a guaranteed, fixed share to maintain their ablution fountains and tranquil courtyards, a clear acknowledgement of their immense social influence and a practical investment in public order. Only after these powerful interests were satisfied did the remaining water enter the intricate network of smaller canals that fed the fields of common farmers. Their access was often governed by a strict rotational schedule, a system of turns known as a warabandi. A farmer might be granted the flow for a specific number of hours, perhaps from one dawn until the next, measured by the slow arc of the sun or the drip of a water clock. This schedule was a source of both profound cooperation and bitter friction. A community had to work together to maintain the channels that served them all, but a neighbor who tampered with a gate to steal an extra hour could plunge a dozen families into crisis. The physical evidence of this entire system is still legible to archaeologists today. By meticulously mapping the size and orientation of the ancient outlet structures at a distribution node, they can calculate the percentage of flow that went to each sector. A wide, smoothly worn channel leading toward the ruins of a palace tells one story. A narrow, crudely cut ditch feeding a cluster of small farmsteads tells another. This intricate, unforgiving system of hydraulic governance was a masterpiece of social engineering, a civilization's deepest values flowing in open channels for anyone who knows how to read them. Beneath the sun-scorched surface, the earth remembers the harvest. While the Qanats themselves tell the story of water delivery, the ancient fields they fed hold a different kind of record, one written in chemistry and fossilized pollen. Scientists drill deep cores into the soil of these long fallow plots, and the layers they extract are like pages from an agricultural ledger. They reveal startlingly high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients that remain elevated even after centuries of abandonment. These are the chemical echoes of a land that was worked with profound skill and intensity, but the evidence gets even more specific. Traces of silica, called phytoliths, left behind by the decaying stems of plants like millet and cotton, act as microscopic fingerprints, identifying the very crops that once swayed here in the breeze. The soil itself confirms an empire running on a sturdy, drought-resistant grain and a lucrative, water-intensive cash crop. Even the weeds have a story to tell. The seeds of certain unwanted plants found in these soil cores are not random. Some species thrive in fields that are left fallow to recover. Others only appear when the same crop is planted year after year. By identifying these ancient weed communities, researchers can decipher the farming practices of the Khwarazmians. They find evidence of sophisticated crop rotation, a practice where farmers would alternate millet one season with a legume like lentils the next. This legume would naturally replenish the soil's nitrogen, acting as a natural fertilizer and ensuring the land could sustain its high productivity generation after generation. This was not haphazard farming. It was a carefully managed, sustainable system of soil science, a deep understanding of the land that maximized its yield without utterly exhausting it. From high above, the ghost of this agricultural landscape becomes stunningly clear. Aerial photography and satellite imagery reveal faint, geometric patterns etched into the earth, the ghost imprints of irrigation furrows and field boundaries. These spectral lines, invisible from the ground, map out a vast and incredibly organized grid of farms. We can see how the water was channeled from the main Qanat outlets into smaller and smaller canals, delivering measured amounts to perfectly rectangular plots. This was a landscape of pure efficiency, every inch planned and utilized. The sheer scale of this reclaimed desert paints a picture of immense agricultural output. How much grain did these fields produce? How many bales of cotton were loaded onto camels bound for the Silk Road? This bounty was the absolute bedrock of everything the empire achieved. The food surplus from these Qanat-watered fields freed a massive portion of the population from farming. It fed the standing army that protected the trade routes. It paid the salaries of the administrators, the architects, and the artists. The wealth generated from exporting cotton and other goods financed the grand libraries and observatories that made Khwarazm a beacon of learning. Every traded silk, every painted ceramic, every advancement in mathematics was ultimately rooted in the fertile soil, nourished by that relentless underground flow. The material culture of the empire, all its art and luxury, was simply the blossoming flower of a deeply rooted agricultural system. This incredible productivity, however, came with a hidden cost, a vulnerability that would become apparent only when the system was pushed to its absolute limit. These dark tunnels hold more than just water and stone. They are accidental museums, preserving the quiet moments of a civilization in the objects lost or left behind by the people who built and maintained them. When an archaeologist carefully sifts through the silt at the bottom of a vertical shaft, they are not just looking for treasure, they are recovering the intimate details of a working life. A simple, unglazed pottery oil lamp, its rim still blackened with soot, tells a story of long, dark hours spent in the deep. It speaks of the Mukani who carried its flickering light, his world reduced to a small circle of visibility in an otherwise total blackness. Nearby, the brittle remains of a leather bucket, its shape preserved in the oxygen-starved mud, evokes the endless, back-breaking labor of hauling sediment up to the surface. This was not a one-time construction project. It was a perpetual cycle of maintenance, a battle against the earth itself to keep the water flowing. Sometimes, the tunnels yield even more personal connections. A single copper coin slipped from a pocket and lost down a shaft does more than just help date the tunnel's active period. It represents a day's wage, a small token of an economy that relied on this hidden infrastructure. A broken piece of a ceramic water jar, its distinctive glaze pointing to a specific century, does more than establish a timeline. It whispers of trade routes, showing that even the common tools of daily life were influenced by styles and materials from distant lands. In rare, precious instances, a tunnel that collapsed suddenly and remained sealed creates a perfect anaerobic environment. In this oxygen-free tomb, organic materials that would have vanished on the surface survive for centuries. A fragment of a woolen tunic, a wooden tool handle still bearing the grip marks of its owner, even the remains of a worker's simple meal. These are the finds that make the past breathe. They collapse the centuries, connecting us directly to the individual, to their tired hands, their simple lunch, their dropped possession. These tangible, human-scale discoveries are given voice by the few written records that survived the empire's fall. While grand chronicles focused on kings and conquests, legal documents and administrative scrolls sometimes mention the water systems. A fragment of a court record might detail a dispute between two farmers over irrigation rights, echoing the tensions we can infer from the physical layout of the canals. A tax ledger might list payments to a crew of mukanis, confirming the specialized, paid profession that the tools in the tunnels suggest. The artifacts provide the physical proof of a life, while the texts provide the context for that life within the society's rules and economy. Together, they form a powerful, poignant narrative. They remind us that the Khwarazmian Empire was not an abstract historical entity. It was a collective of individuals whose daily struggles and small triumphs were all made possible by the relentless, life-giving flow from the world they carved out beneath the sand. The silent testimony of the tunnels finds its voice in the fragile pages of history. While the dirt and stone tell us what happened, the few surviving manuscripts tell us why it mattered. Medieval scholars who traveled through or hailed from the region left behind crucial accounts that act as a translation guide for the archaeological record. The great polymath al-Biruni, a native of Khwarazm, wrote in the early 11th century with the precision of a scientist. He described a land crisscrossed with canals, a landscape made green by human effort, providing a first-hand snapshot of the empire at its hydrological peak. Later Persian historians like Juvayni, who chronicled the Mongol conquests, offer a grim counterpoint. His descriptions of cities like Gurganj are not just lists of buildings, but chronicles of systems. When he writes of the invaders deliberately wrecking the water channels, his words give a name and a motive to the catastrophic collapse layers we find sealed in the Qanats. This is where the two lines of evidence lock together. A text might record that a certain Shah ruled for 30 years and oversaw a period of great prosperity. Archaeologists can then look at the Qanats and see a corresponding burst of construction, new tunnels branching out during that exact time frame, confirming the written record with physical proof. Conversely, a layer of sudden, violent infill in a tunnel can be dated, and historians can then search the chronicles for a specific battle or siege that occurred in that very year, giving the destruction a precise historical context. This convergence is more than just confirmation. It is a form of historical triangulation. By standing on these two pillars, the material and the textual, we can fix the empire's story in time and space with far greater confidence. It allows us to move beyond isolated facts and see Khwarazm as its contemporaries saw it, a powerful, connected state engaged in trade, diplomacy, and intellectual exchange with the wider Islamic world and beyond. The Qanats were not an isolated marvel, but a technology that placed this desert empire squarely on the map of global medieval innovation. This hydraulic mastery transformed a desert outpost into a cosmopolitan crossroads. The wealth that gushed from those underground channels did more than fill granaries. It built a stage for one of history's great intellectual flowerings. In the bustling capital, the proceeds from cotton and grain exports funded lavish patronage. scholars and artists flocked to the courts, drawn by the promise of support and the vibrant exchange of ideas that thrived in a well-watered, secure city. The most brilliant mind to emerge from this environment was al-Biruni. A native of the region, his staggering contributions to astronomy, mathematics, and geography were, in a very real sense, fruits of the Qanat. The agricultural surplus freed him from subsistence labor, while the empire's position on the Silk Road gave him access to scientific texts and ideas from India, Greece, and the broader Islamic world. His calculation of the Earth's circumference was remarkably accurate, and his encyclopedic work on India remains a landmark of cultural study. He was not an isolated genius. He was the product of a system that could afford to fund pure inquiry, a civilization so confident in its material foundations that it could turn its gaze to the stars. This cultural magnetism was a direct form of power. When a caravan arrived from Baghdad or a diplomat from China, they did not just see walls and soldiers. They saw public baths filled with clear water, lush gardens flourishing in the arid air, and libraries stocked with the latest knowledge. This demonstrated a control over nature that was far more impressive than mere military might. It was soft power written in water and greenery that commanded respect and fostered alliances. The empire's very survival in such a hostile environment was its greatest advertisement, proving its sophistication to every visitor. And those visitors carried the story of the Qanat far beyond the empire's borders. The technology itself became a key export, traveling west with merchants and engineers to North Africa and Spain, where it was adopted as the Fagara. It likely traveled east along trade routes, influencing water management discussions in China. The Khwarazmian Empire became a crucial node in a global network of hydrological knowledge. Its reputation built as much on its engineering as on its silks or spices. Yet this very interconnectedness, this reliance on long-distance trade and external recognition, created a hidden fragility. The empire's prestige was tethered to a constant, visible flow of water and wealth. Any interruption to that flow would not just cause domestic hardship, it would shatter the illusion of invincibility that held its place in the world, leaving it exposed to rivals who had long marveled at its green miracles. That intricate web of tunnels was the empire's greatest strength and its ultimate weakness. The Khwarazmian state was a masterpiece of centralized control, but it was built on a foundation with no backup plan. Its entire existence was a high-stakes gamble on the perpetual function of a single, sprawling technology. Every aspect of life, from the food on a farmer's plate to the gold in the royal treasury, was tied to the relentless flow of water from those subterranean channels. This created a society of profound interdependence, where the failure of one critical component could trigger a domino effect of systemic collapse. When the Mongols targeted the Qanats, they were not just destroying infrastructure. They were striking at the single, unified heart of the entire civilization. There were no alternative water sources, no secondary systems to fall back on. A city's entire water supply might depend on one main Qanat. If that tunnel was severed, the city died. This lack of redundancy meant the empire had no resilience, no capacity to absorb a shock and adapt. Its complexity became its cage, the very specialization that made it so efficient, with its guilds of mukanes and its precise legal codes for water distribution, also made it brittle. Each part was perfectly adapted to function within the whole, but utterly helpless on its own. This principle echoes far beyond the deserts of ancient Persia. Look at our modern world. Our lives depend on vast, centralized systems, from the electrical grid that powers our homes to the global supply chain that stocks our supermarkets. These networks are marvels of efficiency, much like the Qanats, but they share the same core vulnerability. A cyber attack on a power station can plunge entire regions into darkness. A disruption at a major port can cause shortages on the other side of the world. We have built societies that are incredibly sophisticated, yet frighteningly fragile. The Khwarazmian Empire compels us to ask an uncomfortable question. In our pursuit of maximum efficiency, have we engineered our own single point of failure? Their story is a stark lesson in the importance of building slack into the system, of creating decentralized backups and fostering local resilience. It suggests that true security may not lie in building a more complex and interconnected machine, but in ensuring that when one part inevitably fails, the entire system does not shudder to a halt. The silence of their buried tunnels is a warning, urging us to look at the intricate networks that sustain our own world and ask, what is our plan B? The ghost of the empire is still visible if you know where to look. Walk across the vast, sun-bleached expanse of the Karakum Desert, and you will not find grand pyramids or marble columns. Instead, you will see the land itself whispering the story. Faint, perfectly straight lines of shallow depressions etch the earth like stitches on a faded tapestry. These are the ghost signatures of the Qanat shafts, the long-buried vertical access points that once breathed life into the tunnels below. They trace the precise geometry of a civilization's most vital arteries, a phantom map of ambition now written in sand and silence. Nearby, the ruins of cities like Qanat stand as solemn sentinels. Their crumbling mud brick walls, eroded by centuries of wind, are the skeletons of a once bustling capital. You can walk through the husk of a grand mosque or a caravanserai and feel the profound absence, the echo of a community that vanished when the water stopped. These sites are now recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Treasures, not for their monumental beauty, but for their outstanding universal value as witnesses to a unique hydraulic civilization. They are protected as a testament to a human genius that turned the desert green, a lesson in what is possible and what is fragile. The empire's memory is also encoded in the very names of the land. Local villages and geographical features often bear names that harken back to ancient springs, canals, or water distribution points, preserving the linguistic echo of a landscape defined by its lost hydrology. In a few remarkable places, the connection is not just a memory but a living practice. Some local communities, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations, still use and maintain sections of the ancient Qanat network. When a farmer clears a channel his ancestors dug 1,000 years ago, he is pulling on a continuous thread that links the present directly to the past. This is not a dead civilization. It is a layer in the cultural bedrock, its philosophy of water management and its hard-won lessons in sustainability enduring long after its last Shah fell. The Khwarazmian Empire may have vanished from the political map, but its imprint on the landscape and its legacy in how we think about our most precious resource remain, a ghostly presence that forever reminds us of the magnificent rise and sobering fall of human ambition. The silent, underground channels of the Khwarazmian Empire have spoken volumes, revealing a history etched not in stone, but in water and earth. We have journeyed through their dark, cool passages, listening to the stories they tell of a civilization's brilliant rise and its stark fall. From their intricate engineering, we have decoded tales of agricultural prosperity that fed cities, of a rigid social hierarchy enforced at the water distribution point, and of a political system so centralized that its power flowed as surely as the current in its tunnels. This entire structure, a marvel of human adaptation, ultimately met a devastating collapse, triggered by the brutal hammer of human conflict and the slow, inexorable pressure of a changing environment. The Qanats teach us a profound truth. that the most enduring and honest records of a civilization are not found in its palaces or its royal decrees, but in its fundamental relationship with its most vital resource. The story of this vanished empire is a powerful testament to human ingenuity, a celebration of our ability to make the desert bloom. Yet, it is also a sobering and timeless warning about the profound vulnerabilities that come with building a society of immense complexity and over-specialization. When a civilization becomes too dependent on a single, intricate system, it loses its resilience, its ability to withstand a shock. As we now face our own global water challenges, with aquifers depleting and climates shifting, the lessons from the sands of Khwarazm are not just historical curiosities. They are urgent, living wisdom. They ask us to consider the systems we rely on today and to build a future that learns from the silent, flowing wisdom of the past. We would love to hear your thoughts on these ancient lessons in the comments below, and if you want to join more journeys into the hidden stories of our world, be sure to subscribe.